I'm sat here with my colleague, Dr. Will Large, who's Reader in Continental Philosophy here at Gloucestershire. Will, the reason I'm talking today is this. You've just published a new book on Levinas, on his Totality and Infinity. I think it's a rather difficult question, but I'll ask it anyway. What led you to want to write this book in the first place?
Well, there are two reasons, really. One, the most important reason is I was teaching Levinas's Totality and Infinity to our amazing students here at the university. And of course, when you are teaching a book at a university, you have a reading list and you suggest to students what commentaries or what books they would like to read to help them understand Totality and Infinity. And the book itself is notoriously difficult, so I thought they do need some help. And I noticed, when I had a look, there wasn't anything really written on Totality and Infinity. There were several introductions to Levinas's work as a whole, but nothing specifically on this book. And I thought, well, there's something I could do to help my own students and future students. So if you like, that was a kind of practical thing. The other one is actually, it was the anniversary of Totality and Infinity, the publication in French 50 years ago, a couple of years ago. And it made me think that maybe it'd be worth having a look at the book again and trying to write a book that would actually help people understand it, because I think that Levinas's thought is very important, but sometimes seriously misunderstood.
Okay, and that's kind of interesting. We're thinking about the encounter of the book by students, Totality and Infinity, when students encounter it, and it being notoriously difficult, which has a tendency to scare off students, and all of us, when we open something that's just... Do you find that by the end of the module, by them coming to it, that they are kind of happy they've read it, or they will just believe it's over? I mean,
No.
do they have an appreciation for certain aspects?
Quite the opposite, really. I mean, although they might find it difficult at the beginning, and I think there's two reasons for that, and I think that's true of any sustained reading in university, especially within RPE, Religion, Philosophy and Ethics, is that the book as such, and you probably find this when you're doing Buddhism with students, is attacks their kind of common sense views of the world. So the difficulty isn't merely conceptual, difficult vocabulary. It really is that it's making you ask questions about your assumptions. And most students will find that moment difficult, and I think they should. It's a productive part of teaching. And then there is the other side of it, which is really my job to help them with, is there's a lot of kind of pre-understanding. Levinas writes a book that, in a certain sense, expects the reader already knows about certain key philosophers, like Husserl and Heidegger, for example, which you wouldn't really expect an undergraduate to know. So, your job is to give them the context to help them to facilitate their understanding, if I can say that word properly.
Right, not bad. The first thing you said before you stumbled over words and things was about this book, as often with teaching, or when teaching is done well, I think, or in the right context of philosophy, is to challenge common sense assumptions of students so that they're thrown back on having to reflect and think and encounter new ideas. What, in this context for Levinas, what common sense assumptions do you think it challenges the students? What is it that they always unthinkingly can accept that it wants to make them drag out of the light again?
Right. I mean, I think the heart of my understanding of Levinas is a distinction I would like to make, though the distinction is a bit arbitrary in terms of the words you use, is between morality and ethics. Normally when students are taught ethics or morality at university, they're usually taught kind of moral theories, the standard ones they would get: utilitarianism, deontology, virtue ethics. So they would learn those kind of meta-ethical theories. And then they would, if they do applied ethics, and it might even be in the same module, they would then apply those theories to supposedly real-world events. But as you know, most of these real-world situations seem rather
dilemmas that never happen.
like trolley problems or that seem rather abstract. And what I like about Levinas is that, in a certain sense, what I would call normative ethics, he's not interested in that at all. There's no point reading Totality and Infinity expecting that Levinas will tell you how to perform some kind of moral action or give you advice.
So there's no kind of ethical formula that comes out that you feed your problems into.
No. So he's kind of fundamentally critical of that kind of moral tradition. What Levinas is attempting to do is to ground morality in a kind of ethical experience, which is not normative. It's not about oughts or shoulds. It's about that what he would describe as his experience of the other human being who calls you into question, who makes you question your own perhaps selfishness and greed. And from that would be the basis of any kind of moral action. So it's prior to moral action. It's that, if you like, what is my motivation to be ethical at all?
So for students, I would imagine they've often come into the degree and into the reflection hoping to find, in relation to ethics, a kind of rational ground for it. They can, they want to be able to reason why one thing is a better thing to do than another thing, or how to solve it. And the kind of answer that Levinas, from what I understand, is saying, wants them to consider more seriously is not an objective, rational account in the same way that they thought could reason out why this was a bad thing. It's very personal. It's very subjective. Do they find that unsatisfactory? That that somehow they were looking for one thing, and it's what is being given to them is something almost of a different order?
No, I wouldn't. I think they find it very inspiring, like as I did as a student. And the other reason I wrote this book is, the reason I went into philosophy was being taught Levinas by a person called Robert Bernasconi. And so, it's very inspiring, I think. And it's not surprised that many students go on to do their dissertations on Levinas because they are inspired. But I was going to say, on the kind of intellectual journey they go on in this degree, it's usually when students come in the first year, they have these kind of moral theories that they've learned at A-level. But a lot of them are already beginning to reflect critically about those moral theories. Most of them are to me, maybe have, if they've reflected about it, a kind of Nietzschean kind of, not cynicism is too strong a word, but a certain doubt about the existence of objective moral values, and also they can experience the world around them. And
well, they've probably seen how poorly those theories kind of hold up to their own experience,
and the hypocrisy of of a lot of moral language. So they're in a sense they already have that critical edge about ethics. Well, what's good about Levinas is I think he gives them the ability to see that kind of critique of moral values doesn't necessarily have to be the last word. So it kind of appeals, if you like, to their kind of ethical intuition. So a lot of some students will say to me, they will accept the kind of Nietzschean critique of absolute moral values, but they would worry about the Holocaust or something like that. They want to
fall into relativism that seems very kind of lazy and kind of potentially frightening.
There is nothing moral. It doesn't really matter
and
whether
it's just a shrug.
Whether you injure anybody or.
And Levinas is absolutely in opposition to that. There's a very kind of what comes out of it is that this kind of almost an obsession with ethics, and that ethics is at the heart of all philosophical inquiry in many ways, is to do with ethics. So it says it's not simple.
No.
But it's more important than anything else.
For Levinas, and again I think why students like reading Levinas is because he questions the very way we think about philosophy. Usually ethics is added on, not as a second thought, but usually is added on some kind of philosophical system that's already in place. So you work out your metaphysics or your ontology, and then from that you will derive an ethics, and that's usually in the history of philosophy. So if you look at like somebody Aristotle, he has a metaphysics, and then from that he develops an ethics. Whereas Levinas turns that completely the other way around, and for Levinas, ethics is first philosophy. Yeah,
absolutely. I think for our students that by the time they get to study this and be in the third year, so that's probably a very welcome message.
They enjoy studying typical texts, but they do need help.
Well, hopefully, it looks as if those lucky enough to be studying it in the coming year might actually get some.
They might do, yes.
I look forward to reading it. Thank you.
You're welcome.